Thank you, everyone, and welcome to the Learning and Families Committee of Wednesday, 25th of October. As always, if you want to ask a question or comment, feel free to either use the chat function, or if you're in the room, I'm entirely comfortable with you waving a hand at me as well. Adam is our clerk today, and I'm going to ask Adam for welcome and apologies, please. Thank you, Adam.
Okay, thanks, Convener. We have apologies this afternoon from Vice Convener Carr, who has been substituted by Councillor Grant Stewart, and also apologies from Provost McDade, again substituted by, this time, Councillor Colin Stewart. All our members are actually present in the chamber, apart from two. I'll just ask those two online to confirm that they can actually hear the meeting. So, Councillor Kigali.
Yes, I can hear perfectly.
Thank you. And Councillor Reid?
Yes, indeed. Perfect. Now.
Thank you, Adam. Any declarations of interest from any elected member? No. Good. Item 3 of the minutes of the meetings. Can we approve the minutes of the 4 meetings as underlined below? Councillor Cuthbert? Go for it.
Thank you, Convener. Yeah, it's item 9 on page 18. I just wondered who were members of the Getting It Right for Every Child steering group. I'd be quite interested to know that information.
Thank you, Councillor Cuthbert. Page 18. If you give us a minute, please.
Convener, I could answer that question if that would be okay.
Yes, thank you, Sharon. Thank you.
So the GIRFEC steering group is chaired actually by myself, Councillor Cuthbert, and it's a multi-agency group, so it consists of senior officers from NHS and from social services and third sector, the reporter's office, and all of the partnerships through the community planning partnership. And the GIRFEC steering group is there to ensure that we make sure that all of our systems and processes are in line with the updated and refreshed guidance on GIRFEC.
Thank you, Councillor Cuthbert. Thank you, Sharon. Any more questions on the minutes, or can we agree and approve them? Thank you very much. Item 4 is the outstanding business statement, which is essentially just the same as the last committee. So I'll ask if there's any questions on that, and if not, can we approve the outstanding business statement? All good. Thank you very much. Item 5 is the appointment to committee, and we're asked to note that Mrs. Susan McLagan replaces Miss Teresa Moran as the religious representation from the Roman Catholic Church. So I would just like to say very briefly, I'd just like to thank Teresa for her many years of service on this committee. Actually, it's for personal reasons that she's had to step down, but we're sad to see it, but at the same time welcoming Susan McLagan to the committee. Can we note that? Caroline. Councillor Shires.
Thanks, Convener. Just having worked with Teresa over the previous administration, just wanted to echo your comments. She was certainly extremely diligent, particularly when it came to things like head teacher appointment panels and all of that kind of thing. So it was just to thank her very much for her contribution, which was appreciated.
Thank you for those kind words, Councillor Shires. Very much appreciated. We'll move on to paper 6, and I'm going to ask Vice Convener Frampton to take this paper, which will be introduced initially by Hazel Robertson.
Thanks, Convener. The production of an integrated children's services plan is a joint statutory requirement placed on the local authority and the health board. Since 2017, Perth and Kinross has worked with partners in Angus and Dundee City Councils, NHS Tayside and Police Scotland to deliver a Tayside plan. The new plan for 23 to 26 builds on our partnership to deliver shared objectives and takes account of key national and local drivers in providing a holistic approach. This year, the specific inclusion of the infant pledge reflects our commitment to the national strategy on recognising the voice of the infant, and this extends our desire to ensure that the voices of all children and young people are heard. This plan does not sit in isolation from other crucial strategic plans such as GIRFEC, the Promise, the Scottish Attainment Challenge Framework, the Whole Family Wellbeing and Poverty Delivery Plans, and our determination to ensure the delivery of common objectives with our statutory and our third sector partners is central to the objectives in the delivery plan. The plan describes the priorities and the actions for the forthcoming years and how progress will be measured. And separately in Appendix 2, we have an update on the achievement of the agreed priorities which took place over 22 and 23. Thank you.
Thank you, Hazel. Any questions? Councillor Stewart.
Thanks. I just want to ask a question about some of the consultation that's going on in preparation of the plan. So if I look in the annex at 4.2, obviously we've stated elsewhere that we've worked with our colleagues in NHS Tayside and Police Scotland. But this has also been approved by colleagues in Angus and Dundee Council. Can I ask, what if the committee didn't approve the plan today? What if there was stuff that we wanted to input into it, but it's already been through approval process at other partners?
Sheila.
Thank you. If there was something of material difference, Councillor Stewart, then we would need to acknowledge that and go back to the writers group and indeed to the leadership group for this and make that clear. And we've never actually been in that situation, but were we to be in that situation, then that's what we'd need to do, and then agree on how that would be then represented, that it would be appropriate for perhaps something different for Perth and Kinross that would not then be collective within the piece, but within the plan as such. What that is a recognition of all of the areas that are important for development in each of the respective constituent partners, and would be things that we would be intending to do by way of improvement. The process to take you there might be slightly different. The extent to which you might need to do something might be slightly different, but we would certainly want to then understand and share that with all of the other partners. And if it did, if push came to shove and there was something that was significantly different to be acknowledged in there, then we would need to do that to represent the views of this council.
Thank you, Sheena. Councillor Barrett, you have a point of clarity.
It was really just to give a point of clarification also that the draft of this came in front of the I can never get the acronym right. Children, Young People and Families Partnership. We haven't had the minutes of that meeting yet because the minutes haven't been approved, but it was reviewed by them in August, September. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Cuthbert.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Yeah, I've got a few questions. I can start on page 34. Just give me 1 second. I was looking at the numbers of children 0 to 18, and I was looking at the number of children in primary and secondary school. And if you look at Dundee and then compare them to Perth and Kinross, we seem to have a lot more children, but we seem to have fewer children in school. I'm just wondering what the difference is. Are they at college, or why is there that sort of difference? It's about 1,000 roughly.
Sheena, please.
There'll be a number of different reasons, Councillor Cuthbert, in relation to that. You'll see that in Angus it's about 6,500. For Dundee, it's about 8,000. In Perth and Kinross, 7,850, if I'm looking at the numbers correctly. what we know is that we expect in the next couple of years, and we're beginning to see that already, to see a very slight decrease in our primary role, which will then transfer into an increase in secondary as these youngsters move through. And it may well be that, you know, that has something that has happened in Dundee before, and it could well be to do with staying on rates in schools, that more young people stay on. But there's not one thing that I know of that would attribute to that difference. It would be a range of different things. And I'm looking to David McCluskey to see if he knows anything more particular. No, thank you.
Councillor Shires.
Thank you, Vice Convener. My question centres around, I think it's page 13 of the pack, and it's about the priority group 4, the care experienced children, young people and the promise. We'll all remember February 2020 in this chamber when, as cross-party councillors, we supported the implementation of the promise, but it's around the delivery of it and the funding of it across the Tayside area. The Scottish Government were keen that this was promoted as something, as a sort of defining mission of the government, and it's whether the Scottish Government are matching that commitment in terms of funding and resource to deliver it as hard and as fast as we were all pledged to do back in 2020.
Hazel.
I was struggling to hear part of your question there, Councillor Shires, but I think it was relating to the raising attainment and meaningful engagement of looked after children. Was that correct? No. I mean, it certainly within the plan here, there is additional funding that has been allocated to look at the particular needs of care experienced children in schools. So we have a dedicated support service going to children who are looked after at home, who are the children who fare worst at school. So there is additional resource being targeted at these children, with tutoring being offered to all of those children. And we know exactly who they all are, so they have all been made that offer. In addition to that, you know, we have, you know, a wider range of supports to families, so they can support their children within the home and hopefully improve their education. I mean, I think, you know, certainly we can say categorically that there's been a 14% increase in the attainment of looked after children within the last year, which is a very positive reflection on some of the work that's going on in Perth and Kinross.
Thank you, Hazel. Councillor Ahern.
Thank you very much. My question is on page 34, and it's about the data, especially the additional support needs. And I just wonder the percentages that we've got there for Perth and Kinross, whether they're an increase on previous years, and I suspect the answer will be yes. And if so, are we managing the resources to cope with this increase?
Sharon.
Yes, Councillor Ahern, you're quite correct. There is an increase in additional support needs in Perth and Kinross, although the demographics are changing slightly. In fact, the rise of additional support needs is more prevalent now in secondary school. And so the numbers have changed slightly, and that's partly to do with the additional numbers of children moving into secondary school. What I would also say is that the range and complexity of additional support needs is also changing, and we've certainly noticed that at the earlier stage of primary. So although the numbers are slightly less, the complexity of the needs that we're needing to address at the early years of primary is also an area of consideration. It is part of the reason that we are undertaking quite a significant review of additional support needs. It is also part of a national picture. We're not alone in the fact that additional support needs are rising across the country, and I know that the Scottish Government are looking at a review of additional support needs for that reason. Within Perth and Kinross, we've undertaken a range of different audits and reviews within our own setting, and we are actually delivering an elected member briefing on the 27th of November, just to talk through the local plans that we are putting in place to address that.
Thank you, Sharon. Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Vice Convener. My question relates to the bottom of page 54, specifically the sentence where it says findings for the first 3 quarters show that the number of referrals to welfare rights and midwifery services, health visitors and family nurse practitioners has been lower than the previous year. And I just wondered, how do workers appraise the need for a referral, and do they undertake a financial assessment with the PN? Thank you.
Sharon, please.
So the pathways for health visitors, and it's actually as a community process. To answer in short, it's really about education, health visiting and children's services working with families at the earliest stage. So some of our teams within education, our parenting and family learning teams, our ECPs within our nurseries, work really closely with health visitors to look at the needs of families. And what we have noticed for quite some time in Perth and Kinross certainly is that there are numbers of families who are entitled to support that don't apply, and we've been putting quite a significant amount of effort into that through the Child Poverty Action Plan, and certainly Ben's team in early years have been very forthcoming in terms of providing different ways of reaching those families, and it's something that's on our education plan, but it's also on the GIRFEC plan and the community plan as well.
Thank you, Sharon. Councillor Cuthbert.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Yeah, my next question is on page 38. It's just under the learning and attainment section. There's reference to learning sessions on the Rights Respecting Schools Award. I was just wondering if this is being taken up by all schools, or which schools have actually taken it up.
Jill, please.
Thank you. We have a number of schools who have taken it up, not all, but at the moment we have out of our 80 schools, 67 schools who are either accredited as rights respecting schools or who are currently registered with ongoing promotion of learning materials. So part of it is rights respecting schools in terms of training around UNCRC. There are online resources available as well as the training. So it may be that not all schools have engaged in the training, but certainly all of our schools have engaged in some way in the materials that we provide.
Thank you, Jill. Councillor Cuthbert, do you want to ask your second question, please?
Yeah. Thank you. It's to do with the Tayside virtual campus. I wasn't quite sure. Is this the same virtual campus that we use, or is it a different one? And if we don't use it, why don't we use it? Because presumably it would give us a wider offering.
It's another virtual campus that we do use in relation to Perth and Kinross virtual campus, and also East Goyle, which is a national virtual campus that we use. So the Tayside one has been focusing on advanced hires and National 3 awards for any young people across the Tayside area. So it's something that our schools are engaged in. Councillor Cuthbert, there's a whole suite of virtual offers that are available across all areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheena. Councillor Shires.
Councillor Cuthbert asked sort of half of my question there. So the second part of it would be, is there, I mean, it's pretty impressive the increase in number of young people that are participating and the results that they're getting, which is all credit to them. My question was about expanding course choice as far as we possibly can, and whether that there are plans as part of the Tayside setup to expand course choice.
David, please.
Yes, there's ongoing assessment of need as it comes forward to ensure that the right courses are available for the right young people at any given year. So it's quite a dynamic offer that's out there, but it's certainly been a growing offer year upon year. And sitting alongside that, there's our own Perth and Kinross virtual campus, which is growing as well. And we'll be able to talk further about details of that growth that we're planning in terms of the offer for session 24-25. So yes, in short, it is a growing offer, but it's a carefully curated growing offer to ensure that it's really meeting the needs of the young people at any given time.
Thank you, David. Councillor McPherson.
Oh, thank you, Vice Convener. My second question relates to the bottom of page 58, referring to counselling in schools. Just to say, as somebody who's been involved previously with providing counselling services to school children, I have to say that the figures that are presented in the table are incredibly impressive. Knowing how great the demand can be for such services. One of the things that I've noticed and previously, that there's inevitably a very high demand that causes a waiting list. So I was just wondering, is there currently a waiting list for these counselling services for children in Perth and Kinross? Thank you.
Susie, please.
Thank you. We do sometimes have waiting lists that can vary across the LMGs according to providers. We have a robust way of monitoring that through the Counselling in Schools Coordinator, who links with the providers and with the schools. If there are concerns about a waiting list, there will be mitigations put in place, such as the counselling providers offering more informal check-ins to young people who are on the waiting list, and very much linking in with school staff who will be making sure that there are and continue to be appropriate supports for any young person on a waiting list.
Thank you, Susie. I don't see any more questions in the chat box, so I'm just going to go ahead and move the report. The Tayside Plan for Infants, Children, Young People and Families 2023 to 26 provides clearly identified actions for all partners in our determination to address inequality, narrow the attainment gap and to protect the most vulnerable families from harm. This plan is unique across Scotland in promoting a collaborative approach with partners across Tayside to ensure our collective ambition to achieve change. The importance of enhancing support in early years is fully recognised, and the focus on common priorities is welcome in building capacity to respond to need. All infants, children and young people deserve the best start in life, and every effort must be made to strengthen opportunities to respond in effective and innovative ways. I applaud the content of the plan and I therefore wish to move this report. Now open the floor to comments.
I'll happily second first, thank you, formally. That's all right. I always forget myself, so don't worry.
Councillor Shires.
Thank you, Vice Convener. I think when this was originally formulated, there was a degree of nervousness and scepticism about, a Tayside-wide approach to things. But actually, I think the plans and the reports in front of us demonstrate that there's great benefit from sharing the expertise, the similar issues that are faced across Tayside, and the resource, and in particular the professionals that cover, whether it be Angus Dundee or Perth and Kinross. And it's a credit to the small team of people that are involved in putting these plans together and delivering on them, that they get the results that they do. And I think Councillor Barrett, yourself and myself see at the Children, Young People and Families Partnership the work that is done across health, police and all the other partners which deliver on these results.
Thank you, Councillor Shires. Councillor Barrett.
Just to say that I completely agree with what Councillor Shires just said. We did go through the draft report at the partnership along with the other agencies who were present, and it's a really good piece of work and really good to see everybody working together to do what's best for our children and young people. Thank you.
There's no more comments, so I'll just hand back now to convener.
Thanks very much, Vice Convener. I think we probably need to formally approve that paper. Can we do that? Thank you very much. We'll move on to paper 7, which is the raising attainment update, which I think is going to be introduced by our executive. In fact, I know it's going to be introduced by our executive director, Sheena Devlin. Thank you.
Thank you, convener. Committee, this report provides a progress update on the Education and Children's Services Raising Attainment Strategy for 2020 to 23, and specifically it provides information on a range of performance measures across what's called the National Improvement Framework, the NIF, specifically in relation to improvement in attainment, with a focus on literacy and numeracy, closing the attainment gap between the most and least disadvantaged, improvement in children and young people's health and well-being, and also improvement in employability skills and sustained positive leaver school destinations for all young people. The improvements are evidenced in all 4 of these priority areas, set against a context still of recovery from the pandemic, and it's important that we do still remember that. Our priorities for improvement in the current academic session include increasing the number of our young people who leave our schools with level 6, that is higher attainment, and improving outcomes for key priority groups, including, for example, young carers, those most affected by priority, and also young people who are looked after at home. A range of officers here who will be happy to take any questions from committee this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheena. Councillor Barrett, I think that's relevant to this paper, those 2 questions. Yes, please. If you can ask one, I'll come back to you if you're second. Thanks, Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, convener, and thank you to David for the report and to all the teams who are behind it. And thank you again for the glossary of terms in these reports. That's really helpful. My first question relates to page 77 and the poverty-related attainment gap between at N5, we say that the poverty-related attainment gap in terms of pass rates is better than the Scottish average for N5 higher and advanced higher, but it's not clear here or on page 91 but that it's actually narrowed. Could you clarify, please?
David McCluskey, please. Thank you.
Sorry, yes, I can in fact clarify that poverty-related attainment gap between quintile 1 and 5 for us at N5 has narrowed over time, and as you said as well, Councillor, it's outperforming the Scottish average for that particular measure.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Barrett. Councillor Cuthbert, please.
Thank you, convener. Yes, my question relates to page 89. It's to do with the higher and advanced higher pass rates and so on. In the table, I note that Perth and Kinross Council were top, if you like, in terms of the statistics for NAT5. They were in the middle for higher, but second bottom for advanced higher, which tends to imply that there's a sort of declining success rate. So I'm just wondering, is there a reason for that? Are we worried about it? Is it something that's been done? Something been done about it?
David McCluskey again, please.
Yes, as you say, at the 3 measures there, National 5 higher and Advanced higher, when we compare ourselves against the comparator authorities, Advanced higher is the one where we do perform most poorly this year. I think there's 2 things to note about that. The first thing is that's not a trend picture for us year upon year, and indeed it's very unusual in terms of an outlier. The other thing that has happened this year is we've ended up with more D awards than we have done in the past. So in other words, some more kind of near misses between D and C. Nonetheless, any relative underperformance that we'd have would be a concern, and that's something that we're working with our schools on very closely in terms of tracking and monitoring in the current session to ensure that that doesn't become in any way a pattern.
Thank you, David. Thank you, David, in fact. Councillor Leishman, please.
Thanks very much, convener. Yeah, my first question is, how big an emphasis on nurturing children as opposed to educating children is placed on teachers? And is there any feedback given to ECS from school leadership teams or teaching union representatives to say that there is such an emphasis on nurturing that it is impacting the time of teaching the academic curriculum?
Gina, please.
Councillor Leishman, the primacy of any teacher's role is to teach the children in their classes, and what's important is that they employ a range of different approaches and measures dependent on the children and young people who happen to be in the classes in front of them. So it's important that there's appropriate differentiation in classes and the right kind of support for the varying different needs. Nurturing principles are one aspect of that. So everybody, as far as I'm concerned, would be aware that, you know, they are a teacher. However, nurturing approaches are very appropriate for a number of children and young people at different times and to different extents and in different classes, and therefore it's impossible to decouple a nurturing approach from learning and teaching approaches, because it's one aspect of an approach to learning and teaching, because unless young people are comfortable and able and ready to learn, the learning process will be all the more challenging. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheila. Councillor Stewart, please.
Thank you, convener. This report is for 22-23, reporting back on performance against the Raising Attainment Strategy 2020 to 2023. When do we have a Raising Attainment Strategy that starts in 2023 for the following years?
David, please.
So in fact, the Raising Attainment Board, in conjunction with our school leaders and the wider ECS, have been working on our next iteration of a Raising Attainment Strategy 23-26. That will be complete in its first draft format by the middle of next week, and we'll be ready to bring that to Council. I'm not sure of the exact date, March, in fact, of next session.
Okay, thanks. I think I would have preferred to see a strategy for 23 to 26 come before the start of the academic year, beginning 23, rather than towards the latter end of the 2023 academic year.
I don't know if you want to comment on that, David, do you?
Yeah, I suppose it's just that we've obviously been working on the 20 to 23 strategy as part of the iteration of the last 3 years. And although you're working within a strategy, nothing remains completely still, does it? So a lot of our new approaches that we've talked about in these papers and in other papers, like the Education Improvement Plan that we brought, for example, our improvement methodology approaches to identifying and creating improvement are a key part of our new strategy moving ahead from 23 to 26. So although that strategy's not been to this committee yet, it's actually live in terms of the way that we are working with our schools and with our wider environment.
And Sheena, please, as well.
Councillor Stewart, we'll look at the timing of a range of different things to see if the cycle can be amended, because there can sometimes be quite a lapse. And of course, we're also one meeting less in terms of this committee in our planned cycle as well, which is why it's actually March, and we would have, I think, ordinarily have looked at that coming in January. So we now don't have the January meeting to bring that to. So we will undertake to have a look at that to see how we might be able to adjust those reporting cycles. Some of that is also dictated to us by when things are due in Scottish Government as well. But we take your point in terms of that look ahead, okay?
Thanks. And a quick follow-up. Similar to the question I was asking about the Tayside plan, if we put something else in now, but it's already been agreed by other partners. I'm just wondering if you're talking about having a draft ready next week and bringing it back in March,
would it be constructive to have maybe a workshop session with elected members, so that if there's anything that we want to input into the raising attainment strategy in terms of giving direction to officers, that can be incorporated in time before it actually comes back to committee?
Yeah, I mean, I think it feels sensible to me. I think there's always this dividing line between letting officers do what they need to do, but I do take on board that there is now a gap between this committee and March, and it does feel quite a big gap. So maybe we can have a discussion, and I'll have the same discussion with Councillor Shires and Councillor Barrett as well, and Councillor Leishman for that matter. And if we feel as a cohort that that would be useful, then let's see if we can put that into place. So, okay, thank you. Please.
Thank you, Convener. On page 117 of the agenda pack, the example of Cooper Angus Primary School was cited as an example, and it stands out as quite a remarkable change in the figures, particularly in the writing, from 56% to 2%. And it probably alludes to my colleague, Councillor Leishman's question. I was just wondering about, we learned about tools, and we learned about implementing money. But I was wondering if we could get a bit of expanding on how these fantastic figures were achieved.
Thank you. Mrs. Dugan, please.
Thank you. In terms of that approach taken within Cooper Angus Primary, I suppose I would say it's one example of the successful approach that we're using across all schools in terms of implementing improvement methodology, ensuring that right down to practitioner level, everybody understands the data associated with individual children, that there's a real understanding of individual needs, and then a real focus on how to move that forward. And in this particular situation, PEF funding supported with staff, but there was no one intervention, if you like. It was a range of interventions and a range of approaches that were appropriate to the individual needs of the children, and a real relentless focus on returning to the progress that was being made and reviewing what the next steps would be.
Thank you, Jill. Thank you, Councillor Stewart. Councillor Barrett, I think we'll come to you for a second question now, please.
Thank you, Convener. I was looking at page 96 with the case study on in Perth High School to reduce exclusion, and I'm pleased to see the reduction from 99 to 61 per 1,000 pupils in 2022-23 and the positive effects that this approach has been having. It's two related questions. One is, how does Perth High School now compare with other PQC schools, secondary schools, in terms of exclusion? And also, is this approach being rolled out elsewhere? Thank you.
David, please.
Yes, I think that every one of our secondary schools is running an approach to try to avoid exclusions, and sometimes the term for that is alternative to exclusion programme, and they all have positive impact, I would say, because we all know the damaging effects of exclusion in young people's education. I think in terms of the project that's going on at Perth High, it is a particularly impressive approach, which is why we are sharing it here as a case study, but it's not in any way an outlier to what's happening across the entirety of the secondary school estate, and it's part of a constant iterative process.
Thank you, David. Councillor, do you have another question? No, Councillor Leishman, please, then, for a second question.
Thanks very much, Convener. Many teachers feel that there seems to be a regular emphasis on what schools and teachers can do better. Some behaviours which would have been previously disciplined are now treated almost as normalised behaviours and ultimately allowed. How do we as a local authority go about demanding better behaviour from our pupils, and as an extension, how do we communicate that with their families?
Thanks for the question, Councillor Leishman, which is an entirely appropriate one, and I think before I let the proper educationist answer the question, I do think it is an issue in terms of a lot of the, if there are problems in schools, it does come from wider society, and that is then far more difficult to sort. But I'll shut up now and let Sheena give you the proper answer. Thank you.
I think what's important to say, Councillor Leishman, is that in recent years we've certainly taken an approach that, you know, to support a child in isolation of the people where it will spend most of its time is not necessarily the most productive approach. So a young person will spend approximately 11% of their time over a year in school. They'll spend, you know, something, I've read research recently that shows maybe 25% of your time over a week could be at television or a screen, but predominantly, you know, you're spending a lot of time away from school, and therefore to look at simply tackling issues in school that may well be better supported at an early stage elsewhere would be folly. And so things like our whole family wellbeing approach, the fact that we have a range of different support staffs who will work to support young people, both in the context of their learning at school, but also with wider family learning, for example, is really important. In terms of behaviour, it's interesting because Sharon Johnson and I were in a school just this morning where we were talking with the staff about thresholds. And you know, thresholds are thresholds in terms of what's acceptable and what's not acceptable, and ensuring that you model and set clear expectations and use other young people who do in fact model good behaviour is really, really important as well. So I think there's something there in terms of, absolutely, there's work done with families, with community groups, with groups of different young people through youth services, for example. Learning just doesn't always take place in the class, but that readiness to learn in the class is supported in a range of different ways. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. Apologies, Bailey Hearn, I missed your question. So if you go next, and then Councillor Shires, I think, has a second question, as does Councillor Grant Stewart. So Bailey Hearn first, please.
Thank you very much, Convener. My question is on the attendance. On the graph on page 93, it shows a steady decline in attendance over the last nearly 10 years, specifically in the secondary schools. And I refer to the case study, which is on page 96, which is the outreach programme that was introduced by Perth Grammar School, which I really supported when it came out. And I was with the head teacher chatting just before the recess about the success of it and how we have pupils now back engaged with mainstream education. But that is one school doing one project to get people back into school. How do we nationally improve the attendance records? And if this is successful in this school, is this the sort of thing that needs to be run out to other schools, specifically in Perth and Kinross, but nationally, because it's worked really well with the particular building they use is not connected to the school, it's elsewhere in the community, which I think is where the benefit has come in that particular programme. But so there's two questions there. Should that be rolled out to other schools, and what is being done nationally to improve the attendance record? Thank you.
Shannon, particularly with the first one, actually, particularly please, if that's okay. And if you want to touch the second one, that's up to you.
Sorry, I'm not sure whether there was two. So the question was about attendance, Councillor Ahern, nationally, and should the programmes be rolled out? Yeah.
Yeah, the two parts of that question is what's being done nationally to improve attendance, and the second part of it, if you like, is the project that's going on at Perth Grammar School. Is that something that, because that has improved and we've had pupils go back full time and some people engaging part time with the school at the moment, which might lead to it, as that's worked, is that something that should be rolled out to other schools as well?
Thanks, Bailey Hearn. Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you, Bailey. So nationally, attendance has dropped, and the impact of COVID has really had an impact on the attitudes to attendance in school, and that is something that has been noticed nationally, and there is some work related to that. across the country, and it is one of the stretch aims that all local authorities are having to deal with. And we have talked about it quite often in committee about the range of different attendance issues that we have. So we have low level attendance where young people perhaps don't turn up 5 days a week in the way that they used to. There's a lot of interesting research that's coming out about parental attitude to attendance and how important parents feel about that. And there is some very focused work happening in Perth and Kinross in relation to the range of different ways and reasons for children and young people not attending school. Part of that is about working with families to reinforce the importance of attendance at school. Part of it is related to the anxiety that some children and young people are exhibiting in coming to school. And so we have taken a real focus of that within Perth and Kinross, and we're about to launch. And in fact, we had a meeting yesterday within the education management team about running a series of events this year to tackle attendance. And so there'll be 3 events that we're planning to be looking at what is the good practice that's currently happening within our schools, and Perth Grammar case study as exemplified within this report is one of the areas that we want to share. So we're looking and gathering at the moment lots of different interventions that schools are doing. We're sharing that good practice and we're hosting a conference with our partners. And as the Executive Director said in relation to relationships, it does take a village to raise children, doesn't it? And so what we are doing is we're pulling together all of our resources. So our partnerships, our schools where we've got really good practice, and across the whole range of children who really can't get across the door and who need something very different, to those children and parents who need just a wee bit of push to remember that 5 days a week might make a difference to that SQA result at the end of the year. So we are focusing on it extremely strongly here, and I suspect that we will invite, well, in fact I know we will be inviting national organisations to join us for those events.
Thanks, Sharon. Thanks, Billy Hinn. And sorry, Sheena, you're going to add something. Thank you.
I'm pleased that Sharon mentioned the Behaviour Summit, because I think that's really important. That's where we're going to bring together a wide range of people to look at this. We've done a really close analysis. I say we, the Royal We schools have done a really close analysis on the specifics around attendance and non-attendance in their schools, and at every term visit it's something that is discussed. And interestingly, Baillie Ahern, there's not a, whilst there's some commonality, there's not uniformity in that commonality of reasons. So we see quite significant differences between that which we would consider to be authorised and unauthorised absence in different schools. And so the approach that needs to be taken would be different depending on the types of absence there. But one of the things that I have been mindful of and that we have discussed is that previously there was a attendance subcommittee of this committee, and it hasn't sat since the pandemic. And it's something that I would be keen to discuss with all members of Learning and Families Committee in the context of the work that we're doing through the summit, to consider, you know, is an attendance subcommittee still a fit for purpose subcommittee as it had previously been constituted? And if not, what else might we want to put in place? Because if you like, there will be staged interventions to help support attendance. And one of the key messages that we've been trying to get over is that you can actually improve the well-being of a young person by simply having them at school on a more regular basis. And if you think about the number of school days in a calendar year as being 190, every time there's an afternoon or a couple of days or a couple of weeks holiday in a term time, that has a significant impact on a young person's ability to continue in a consistent way with their learning. So it is something that we're really keen to push on, and it is something that I would like to come back with the team to this committee to understand, if we were to look again at that subcommittee, what might its role be, and have a discussion about that. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sheila. Thanks, Billy Hearn. I have further questions from Councillor Shires, Councillor Grant Stewart and Councillor Leishman. If anybody else wants to ask a question, it's kind of last orders, as it were. But I'll go to Councillor Shires in the meantime. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. If I might just be indulged for a moment on the point that the Executive Director was just making, having sat on the attendance subcommittee over the years, by the time young people got to it, it was, you know, they were almost out the door of school. It was too late. So I think those of us that have sat on it in the past will probably welcome that discussion. That'd be really good. My question was around the priority 4 about employability skills and sustaining positive destinations. I'm aware from the work that, and I'll give her a name check, Mrs. Lawrence does at Blairgowrie High School with the developing the young workforce, the excellent work that she does, and I'm sure it's replicated across Perth and Kinross. But the question was around the change in employers post-pandemic, that a lot of people have changed the way that they work, and the opportunities for young people to go in and shadow people or work alongside them might have changed. And it was to get an understanding about how we have worked with employers to look at how we can address that change in the workplace, and to understand what discussions are happening with people like the Perth Leadership Forum, Chambers of Commerce, etc., to promote finding out what skills are needed within the workforce as it is in 2023, as opposed to the way that it was pre-pandemic.
Thank you, Councillor Shires. David McCluskey, please.
Yes, so we're really lucky to work in close partnership with the DYW Day Cities Board, who have that overarching leadership role around about DYW, and they've been a great support to us, and indeed our coordinators in each of our secondary schools and our own central officers who are working in this effort. You know, there's probably not the time, but we're all aware about how the work landscape has changed over time. So it's about flexibility to ensure that all young people can get engagement with those skills moving ahead. And I think probably a heartening note for us is that in terms of a participation measure, that's been published since this report was published, an updated measure, and we've actually improved by 1.1% between last year and this year. So yeah, evolution, change, but key partnerships, and also our own local employability partnership is a key player in that, and that's somewhere where I sit with other officers from ECS and some of those partnerships you've mentioned, Councillor.
Thank you, David. Councillor Grant Stewart, please.
Thank you, Convener. My question is in the attainment report, page 115, section 5, impact. I've actually got two questions, Convener. I think they're related. There was an improvement of 27% in all the schools reporting. And so I'd like to maybe understand what was the barrier that was preventing previously schools reporting. And in section 5.1 in the headline outcomes, we've got a 36% increase in the interventions recorded. So is that linked because we've got better reporting going on?
David McCluskey, again, please. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Stewart.
Yes, thanks. So that intervention recording is another bit of jargon for us, isn't it? It's the closing the gap tool that some of you may have heard us talking about before, and there's been a model which we've developed here in Perth and Kinross, along with our Education Scotland partners, and a model which we've developed and improved and honed over the years to the extent it's receiving some national recognition. So I guess the question about barriers before is just something that our practitioners and schools are becoming more skilled and adept at. The tool itself is a better, more responsive and more useful tool for us as well. So it's twofold. We're getting better use out of it, and we're able to get better data out of that in terms of the fidelity of interventions that we're putting in.
Thank you, David. We've got Councillor Leishman, and then Councillor Stewart will have the last question on this paper. Councillor Leishman, please.
Thanks very much, Convener. It follows on from Executive Director Devlin talking about thresholds earlier. Can officers provide examples of what behaviours merit different timescales of exclusion from schools?
David? Sharon? Sorry.
Yeah, Councillor Leishman. So in terms of exclusion from schools, that is an extreme act that any school would take, because you're depriving a young person of their entitlement to education, and so there are very strict rules around exclusions. And the reasons for exclusion are that a young person is in danger of harming themselves or others, or they are detrimental to the good order and discipline of the school. And there's some very clear the guidance around that nationally, around how that should be done. In terms of thresholds generally in schools, it does go back to the question about the nurture and relationships and how teachers are able to teach. And so when children are coming to school, we're required to teach the whole child. So it's not just about literacy, numeracy and health and well-being. It's about all aspects of their learning, and some of that learning is about social skills and learning how to interact appropriately and in a social way. It's also about developing emotional skills, which are extremely important for all of us as humans, and not all children come to school with the same, attributes and skill development. And so therefore, as all teachers are trained to do, you have to teach a child from where they are, and what you have to do is make them safe and secure and have strong nurturing relationships. Nurturing relationships doesn't mean to say that bad behaviour is allowed, and I think that's a fallacy that's sometimes portrayed. Nurture is about providing safe boundaries for all adults and children. And so therefore, there is no bad behaviour that's allowed. There will be bad behaviour that's occurring in schools that needs to be dealt with appropriately by skilled adults. And so what we do within all schools nationally is to make sure that our practitioners are as skilled as they can be, that we have good processes and procedures in place to support them in that, and for them to be able to manage children's behaviour where it's not as skilled as it needs to be. And so therefore, we've been working very hard within Perth and Kinross on a relationships policy, which is a framework, and it is about actually making sure that we've got safety and security as the first part of what we provide within our schools for adults and for children. We're also looking at the skills of children and staff, and we've invested quite heavily in our SEF funding this year, our strategic equity funding, in making sure that we've had developing courses and programmes for our staff to look at making sure that the environment is right for children, to avoid them escalating behaviours that are difficult to manage and ultimately may lead to exclusion. And we are doing that very systematically, if you like. So it's something that we are working very closely with our practitioners, in fact with our trade unions, and we do have a working group which we've had for some time, but we're refocusing that group on looking at what is it that needs to happen to make sure that staff and children know the boundaries, understand the processes within Perth and Kinross that we use to manage those, and to make sure that those frameworks are in place and implemented well. So it is a very emotive subject because there's a lot of discussion about behaviours and thresholds in schools, on buses, within the community. There's a lot of work going on in there, but within a school setting, we're focusing very much on making sure that we've got those ground rules and that framework in place. There's always going to be situations where exclusions have to happen, but it's our job to make sure that we protect both schools and children and young people, that when an exclusion occurs, that we have taken every step possible to avoid that in the first place.
Thank you, Sharon. Sheila, please.
As Sharon said, Councillor Leishman, exclusion is the last resort. You know, it's absolutely the last resort, and she's articulated really well some of the reasons for that. What we also know is that for young people who are excluded from school, if you are excluded once, the likelihood of you then being excluded again begins to increase, and so it goes on. And we know that as soon as that cycle, that pattern starts developing, then we know that the life chances and outcomes for those young people are much diminished in comparison to those who don't experience that. That doesn't mean to say that that tool is not there to be used appropriately, but it is about being appropriate. So you asked about, you know, is there a 1 day, a 2 day, a 3 day? I think if I'm understanding your question, that you would say if it's X, it's 1 day, if it's Y, it's 2 days. And I'm afraid as often I have to say, no, there's nothing just quite as straightforward as that, because each case has to be looked at differently. But the focus absolutely has to be on what might the alternative be, because for some young people, we might be doing them a significant disservice by having them completely excluded from school. So it's what are the alternatives to exclusion that we are keener to look at? And we know that for some young people, excluding them from school may well not have them in the safest place, because for a lot of young people, being in school is the safest place for them. So unfortunately, there's not a straightforward answer that says, you know, yes, it's this or this. It's always about a range of things, but it's absolutely about being clear about, as Sharon said, it's not that there's bad behaviour is tolerated. There's got to be clear expectations of what is expected and what we're back to those threshold points, and then what happens when that is not met. But that will sometimes need careful handling, not sometimes, will always need careful handling on behalf of the responsible adults, of which there might be a range, not just an individual class teacher trying to support a young person with particular difficulties. Thank you.
Thanks very much to you both for the answer. And I know we could have the to and fro about this all day, but there is also the other flip side to that, that by not excluding a child, and I completely take on board what you said there about excluding them is to their harm and detriment, but there is also worth bearing in mind, the flip side to that is that by keeping them in school, then you're actually potentially putting other children and adults, teachers, classroom assistants and so on in harm's way. So that's not actually my point about this one, but I would just want to know, when it comes to exclusion, let's just say a child does get excluded or is to be excluded, what's everyone's role in that? In regard of, is it the head teacher of the school that makes that decision? Is it what's the role of the QIO in that process and the wider ECS department?
Sheila?
If it would be helpful, Councillor Lishman, we're happy to take you through the whole of the policy and do that step by step. So very happy to do that away from here today, if that's helpful.
Thank you, Councillor Leishman. Councillor Stewart, and then I'm going to move the paper.
Thanks, convener. It was to follow up on the answer from Executive Director Devlin to Bailey Ahern. And I think you were talking about how a disruption or an interruption to the normal pattern of school attendance made it difficult to sustain improved attendance in the longer term. And I just wondered how that applied to, for example, strike days and in-service days.
I mean, what I would say, Councillor Stewart, is that any interruption to learning can be detrimental to young people, and anything that breaks that regularity and that routine is detrimental.
So should we look at reorganising where, when and where in-service days occur during the school year? Because I know that they can be disruptive for parents and now disruptive for attendance for the pupils too.
In-service days are known days that schools are not open to children. They're, you know, that's built in statute. There's 190 days for pupils and 195 days for staff. That's a matter of statute. So that in itself, you know, there's 190 days set out for learning, of which the 5 for in-service are not. So I'm not sure that would necessarily make a difference. If there were to be a change to those national terms and conditions, that would be negotiated nationally. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I'm going to move the paper now, but thank you for all those questions. I'm going to. There'll be a couple of caveats to what I say at the end, but this is about raising attainment. This paper, and it's very welcome. It clearly shows the very positive impact of the range of interventions and approaches deployed by staff in all our schools actually, and settings in terms of excellence, equity, employability, and importantly health and well-being as well. The two caveats, and it's one that the previous convener always said as well, there's never any room for complacency, and she was quite right with that, and we won't be. But it also needs saying that this really good attainment doesn't come automatically or by accident or easily. It comes because of the hard work, dedication, professionalism, patience of our teaching staff, of course, and actually our non-teaching staff as well. So it's appreciated, genuinely appreciated. But it is recommended that the Learning and Families Committee considers the contents of this report, and I would like you to duly note it, if that's okay. And I need to, because I always forget as well, need you to second, please, Councillor Fran.
Happy to second.
Thank you very much. We have one paper left, but it is an important paper. And given that we have a specific request for a 5-minute, we'd have comments as well, of course. We'll do comments, and then we will have a comfort break after. Sorry, Councillor Leishman. Comment from you first, and then Councillor Shires.
If you look at the chat, you'll see that will be a brief comment because I also requested the toilet break. Thanks very much, convener, and to Executive Director Devlin for the report, and for her and all the officers' answers are much appreciated. Schools have a massive role to play in reducing inequalities. Locally, we are fortunate to have passionate, motivated and skilled teachers. Our results are evidence of this. But teachers need to be supported by others, including the Scottish Government by way of policies and funding, and also more ASN specialists, classroom assistants and psychologists. We also know that too much of teachers' time is taken up by not actually educating, which of course negatively impacts the children. When speaking to teachers, they feel that the burden of closing the attainment gap is placed almost entirely on their shoulders. And during lockdowns, I think it was fair to say that there was a general feeling of newfound respect for teachers and the great work that they do. But post-pandemic, teachers are no doubt about it feeling let down. I understand that there are many other factors that are proven in raising attainment, but classroom discipline gives teachers the foundation to successfully teach and children the foundation of being able to learn. The effects of COVID still loom large. Areas of high deprivation were hit the hardest in the pandemic. Audit Scotland said that the variation in the learning experience of children and young people during the pandemic exacerbated the poverty-related attainment gap. And within that statement, the truth is that the education attainment gap was already there. And now, after going through the pandemic, many parents are at the sharp end of the cost of living crisis. We all know that in Perth and Kinross, that is a low-paid economy, with approximately 25,000 people not being paid a living wage. Food bank usage is increasing, and generally, people's living standards are deteriorating. Parents are obviously and understandably exhausted, and families are suffering because this impacts parental engagement in the child's learning. Therefore, it's also understandable that education attainment for the most affected by our society's inequalities is less. Perth and Kinross have done well because it's clear that closing and eliminating the difference in school results between Scotland's poorest and wealthiest pupils has been a national failure. And there's no quick remedies that will see us really close the education attainment gap. And it was touched on in the questions, there are a lot of issues. We need a system that goes further and faster and commits to a better long-term approach to government policies in healthcare, childcare, social services, welfare, housing, employment, income, and definitely education. Because all those areas are in a sorry, parlous state, and it means gross inequality.
We get a brief one the next time. Councillor Shires, please.
Yeah, brief. Look the dictionary definition up. Fine. I just want to say it's a really good report, and it is a credit to all of our officers and teachers and non-teaching staff right across Perth and Kinross. Councillor Massey and I were in Blairgowrie High School a few weeks ago, and I was really struck by the fact that they had these kind of banner pull-ups that had statistics on them about, it was quite blunt, the statistics about, you know, if a pupil misses X number of days at school, the potential impact on outcomes, and these were dotted around the school in your line of vision. And I thought that was a new thing I hadn't seen in the school before, but it was that very practical, very in-your-face reminder to everybody, staff, and indeed to pupils about the income of it, the impact of attending school. And I very much welcome the Executive Director's commitment to discussion around how we can support the legislation that sits around young people and children attending school, but very much that early intervention so that we can make sure that those outcomes as displayed on those pop-up banners at Blair High can actually be delivered on. So I think that is brief, Brian.
Thank you, Councillor Serr. Sorry. Okay, thank you, everyone. We'll get on with paper 9 if that's okay. Paper 8, I should say. There is a paper 9 that none of you know about, but we'll get on to that in a minute. Thank you, everyone. Paper 8 is Pupil Equity Funding Update, and this will also be introduced by our Executive Director, Sheena Devlin. Sheena, please.
This report provides an update on progress made in Perth and Kinross to close the poverty-related attainment gap through the use of pupil equity funding. It outlines the range of measures implemented to improve performance and monitor progress. It meets the requirements to report on the expenditure and, importantly, the impact of PEF. The report illustrates an improving picture in terms of how schools are managing this budget and how effective the interventions being put in place to support children and young people actually are. In academic session 22-23, Perth and Kinross schools were allocated a total of £1,873,930 worth of funding. The end of the school year in June 2023, 99.6% of the allocation had been spent. Detailed analysis of plans and interventions have identified the approaches which are having the most impact in literacy, numeracy, and health and wellbeing, enabling them then to be scaled up and rolled out as appropriate across a range of other schools. Progress is being made across Perth and Kinross in closing the poverty-related attainment gap, with improvement demonstrated in the achievement of curriculum for excellence levels in literacy and numeracy across P1, P4, P7 and S3. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Sheena. I would welcome questions on this report, please. Councillor McPherson, please.
Thank you, Convener. My question relates to the top of page 19, where it mentions about the staffing and resources. And I just wondering where it mentions teaching and single status staff. I was wondering what the staff roles are included in the terms single status staff. Thank you.
Mrs. Dugan. Jill, please.
Thank you. Single status staff includes a range of staff that are not teachers. So that could be play assistants, pupil support assistants, community link, community learning assistants. So a range of other supports available to individual schools.
Thank you, Mrs. Dugan. Thank you, Councillor McPherson. Councillor Shires, please.
Thank you, Convener. My question's around reference to the intervention mapping tool. I just wondered if we could have a wee bit more detail around what that looks like and how it will work to track results over time.
Susie, please.
Thank you. Yes, the interventions mapping tool is designed so that schools are able to follow their needs analysis around needs that they have identified across the board in their school. So that could be in health and wellbeing, literacy and numeracy, and then to match that against the programmes that we are running in Perth and Kinross linked to our literacy, numeracy and health and wellbeing strategies. And in terms of monitoring the impact then linking to the Closing the Gap tool so that we can see which programmes are working and to what extent within our Perth and Kinross schools.
Thank you, Susie. Thank you, Councillor Shires. Councillor Leishman, please.
Thanks, Convener. Last month, the Deputy First Minister said that the government will allow councils to bring £30 million of the PEF funding forward and use it to manage pay pressures in 23-24 on a one-off basis, and commit that in return, the PEF allocation for 24-25 will increase by £30 million to rebalance this. How much of the underspend will the Scottish Government take from PKC and hopefully return to us?
Sheena, please.
In relation to an underspend, Councillor Leishman, we have, I think it's around about £100,000 of the total that's been allocated. So if indeed what you've said there materialises, then that would be the level that would go into that collective pot if that's indeed what happens, with the expectation that that money then would come back. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheena. I mean, the one thing I'd like to add is I have had conversations with parliamentary colleagues. I was worried that there would be a detriment to Pupil Equity Fund. It's vital. I was assured that this was some kind of clever accounting thing. That's probably not the right phrase. It was beyond my comprehension, but I was assured that there would be no detriment to Pupil Equity funding. With it was more about calendar, I think. Thank you, Councillor Welsh, please.
Thank you, Convener. Obviously, going forward, there's going to be increasing restrictions and concern around budgets. And I note that in the case studies, which I think are excellent for Kinross High School, that in essence, to gain the significant improvements that were made, it looked as though it was potentially 3 staff members that were allocated to do this. On the basis that this may not be possible to continue to do, are there any learnings that we can take from this that we can apply to other schools to maybe get the same results, potentially without such a significant headcount increase? And I've also got a small supplementary question. For small rural schools, with small numbers of teachers, how do we support those schools to, for example, ensure that attendance timekeeping and is also supported without taking them away from their, if you like, sort of core duties? Thank you.
David McCluskey, maybe for the first bit, please.
I think in terms of the questions about interventions to effect improvement, that's what we're talking about here in PEF funded interventions to effect improvement. How they're funded, these are improvements that we try to implement right across our system. So when there's learning, we try to share it effectively across the piece. And then the other part of that question is about how we utilise and deploy our resources to best effect. So, I think that example that we've included in the case study for Kinross High School, there's a lot there that we're actually using right across the piece to ensure that that's something that's available for everybody. I'm not sure whether you want me to answer the second question, which is about the rural schools, or whether Sharon wants to take that on.
Thanks, Sharon.
Thank you, Councillor Welsh. And your comment about, when PEF is perhaps no longer available, then how do we make sure that those interventions are not lost? And part of the work that we've been doing over the past 7 years of this funding is making sure that we've had a sustainability plan, because we've always known that this is not permanent funding. So where we're looking at the PEF funding, sometimes we've employed additional staff to trial some type of interventions. And as Susie just described, the interventions mapping tool, we've been spending a lot of time making sure that where we are putting interventions in, we need to know that they're impactful. And if they are, we are then looking at the staff that we have available and building those skills into the existing staff. We also used the COVID recovery funding, additional staffing, to make sure that for instance, pupil care and welfare officers to support attendance. We've now embedded that within all of our schools. And in answer to your question around rural schools, we also then took a very strategic decision around our COVID monies to ensure that where there are small schools in rural areas, that we have additional staff, not attached to the schools per se, but available to the schools. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, Councillor Welsh. Councillor Grant Stewart, please.
Thank you, Convener. Under the quality assurance, I was wondering in point 6.3, the self-evaluation that the schools undertake to review their PEF. I was wondering if we could expand what that process actually is.
Jill, please.
Thank you. So as part of our quality assurance processes, PEF is included in that. So officers will have regular discussions with schools at termly meetings around, first of all, the spend, and then second of all, the actual impact of the interventions, which is built into their ongoing self-evaluation against their improvement plans. So anything that's a PEF intervention will be referenced within a plan, and so they're supported really just to make sure that that really good use of data is used, that measures are in place. We use an approach around improvement methodology where we revisit the measures, and we ensure that schools are able to evidence the impact and support schools where if an intervention has come to the end of its time, you can find something else and think about what to do next in terms of taking that forward. So we're also really well supported by our Education Scotland Attainment Advisor around PEF. So we do joint visits to schools as well where there are areas we'd like to support further. Okay.
Thank you, Mrs. Dugan. Thank you, Councillor Stewart. If there are no more questions, I will move the report. And I like a bit of PEF, as some of you may know. I think it is a really successful Scottish Government initiative. That's not completely why I like it, although it helps. More of the serious point is it is because it makes a difference to young learners. It makes a very targeted and specific difference to young learners when they need it and in the way that they need it. 6,543, I think, in fact, in this report. And it does prove that when we put money and resources directly in the hands of those locally who know what their issues are and have the knowledge and ability to make a difference in young people's life, it works. And there's several examples of this in this report. So long may it continue, frankly, and I'm delighted to move this paper. If Councillor Frampton can second it, please.
Happy to second.
Thank you very much. Comments, please. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Convener, and thanks to everyone who's been applying the Pupil Equity Fund effectively to help close the attainment gap, to improve attendance and to address other key needs of our young people. It's really good to see this year that the Closing the Gap monitoring tools being used in all schools with improving accuracy, and it was interesting to hear also about the interventions mapping tool. Thank you for that. And just to say that we do look forward to further improvements next year, and thank you all very much.
Thank you, Councillor Barrett. Councillor Leishman. Sorry, Councillor Shires, go for it. Councillor Shires.
Thank you, Convener. Yeah, welcome the report and the outcomes within it. I'm particularly interested, Susie, in the mapping, because the more that we know about the outcomes of the interventions and whether they deliver real results, it makes it easier to make the decisions for future funding. Just one point to make, Convener, and that is that we particularly welcome the empowerment of head teachers and giving them the opportunity to really make the difference in their schools, because they are the people that know their school community best. Thank you.
100% agree, Councillor Shires. It's about the head teachers and indeed the senior leadership teams as well. In conversations with their staff, it's absolutely crucial. I couldn't agree more. Councillor Leishman.
Thanks very much, Convener, and thanks once again to Executive Director Devlin for the report. Firstly, it was great to read about some of the excellent stories of PEF provided in the case studies. And I admire the empowerment of the PEF and that it allows head teachers to identify what areas they believe need addressing and we see benefit for their pupils. Empowering staff is most definitely a strength. But I think it is also fair to say that as a government policy, the Pupil Equity Fund is only part of a much needed bigger programme if we are to really close the educational attainment gap. PEF success is down to a mixture of having a good head teacher in tune with their pupils' needs, acute awareness of the poverties their pupils' families are experiencing, and, in all honesty, an element of luck, as head teachers naturally have to experiment and take calculated gambles on projects and potential solutions. As I said earlier, thankfully we are fortunate to have an excellent teaching workforce in Perth and Kinross, but the PEF should be an extra, something to work alongside and complement policies that will see us close the education attainment gap between the least and most wealthy. We must have a more strategic approach that will alleviate some of the pressures our teachers and head teachers encounter, something more than a pot of money given and then spent in a manner that we hope something sticks. I also can't help but feel that the PEF interventions for many families possibly come too late in primary 1. While listening to school teachers, many would like to see parent-toddler classes being covered under PEF. This would see some parents improve on how they can assist with their child's formative learning. I make no criticism of parents in this comment. From my own experience, it's the hardest job I've ever done. And working with parents and providing skills would help parents help their child. The early start and encouragement of greater parental involvement would benefit the children with the transition into formal primary education with this, and in turn, benefit teachers. I think there's also a solid case to be made for it leading to better behaviours when children enter primary education and reduce the incidence of violence and aggression that we read about in committee papers or that we hear from teaching staff. And finally, PEF should be used for the right things, what it's been designed for. I welcome the Executive Director and Convener's assurances that the PEF money is safe, but the failure of the Scottish Government in not balancing budgets and the movement of £30 million here and there in a robbing Peter to pay Paul Smoke and Mirrors Act could negatively impact some of the children from the most deprived backgrounds and lead to uncertainty for head teachers. The report and, of course, the PEF funding is welcomed, but other things need to change when it comes to tackling the structural and wider societal inequalities that blight education.
Thank you, Councillor Leesman. I do think some of the early interventions that you speak of, and you're absolutely right to speak of them, are crucial. I think the massive investment that Scottish Government's put into 1140 hours expansion, free childcare basically for 3, 4, 5-year-olds universally and some 2-year-olds as well, will start to make a difference. And I know that Scottish Government are keen to expand that even further when it becomes possible. So I think the points are valid. I'd like to think Scottish Government are already making inroads into that, but at the end of the day, we don't hope that PEF makes a difference. This paper proves that it does make a difference. But comments noted. Thank you. Thank you very much. I did kind of get mixed up between paper 8 and paper 9. There's not really a paper 9. However, it would be remiss of me to finish this meeting without paying a very short but thoroughly deserved tribute to Sharon Johnson, who's here in our last Learning and Families Committee. I've been here 6.5 years working with you, Sharon. I know that some of the members here, 1 or 2 of the members will have been here longer, not least Councillor Shires, but all I can say is that I've thoroughly enjoyed working with you. I don't want to patronise anybody, as I always say, but you're clearly very knowledgeable and your advice was always honest, succinct and straight. Even on the odd occasion, maybe more than odd occasion, where I was hearing rubbish privately, you weren't shy to tell me that, and that was appreciated. But you know, you've been a great service to local government over the years, not just in Perth and Kinross, but not least Perth and Kinross. You'll be missed, but on behalf of the committee, I would like to wish you good luck and best wishes for whatever comes next in your life. Well done, Sharon. Councillor Leesman.
Please correct me if I'm wrong as well, but is this Hazel's last one as well? No.
We're delighted to have Hazel for one more, I suspect. So, but noted, thank you. I think we're done, everybody. Thanks very much for that today and much appreciated. Thank you.